Today's daf is Daf Zayin, and we'll begin with Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Mistei ha'ilon kidarko, mistei ha'lavan shelo kidarko. This is a quote from our Mishnah, and Rabbi Yehuda says that if you have a stay ilon, which is an orchard of trees, and you have to trap these creatures, these rodents that are endangering the continued existence of the Elon, then you're allowed to do that on Chol Moed, even Kedarko. However, in the case of a stay Lavan, where the danger of these rodents to the grain field is limited, therefore he has to do a malach with a shinui. Very often on Chol Moed, we find a heter to be lenient if you do the malacha with a shinui. And that's going to be the requirement of a shinui in the case of a stay lava. That's the shita of Yehuda. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brisa. Keitei Kedarko. The Brisa wants, so what's the difference between Kedarko and Shelo Kedarko as far as trapping rodents are concerned? It says that Chofer Gumav Solaba Mitsuda. This would be Kedarko, that you dig a hole and you put a mitsuda, a trap inside the hole, and that's the normal way that you would capture an animal. And what happens is that when you dig this hole, the rodents gravitate towards this hole, and then they get trapped in the mitsuda. Keitzet Shelo Kedarko, what would be an unusual way of capturing a rodent? Noetz shapud umaka bekurdum. You can actually crush the animal, the rodent. How so? You take a shapud. Shapud is a metal bar, thin bar, long bar that we use for a rotary, for a barbecue. That's a shapud. And you take that and you thrust it into the ground, and you strike it with a hammer. He actually flattens out the ground, and as a result, the earth falls on the animal and crushes it to death. That's Shelo Kedarko, and that would be allowed according to Rabbi Yehuda in the case of a stay lavan. We learned in a brisa. Now we're going to take the Chumrah of Rabbi Yehuda and we're going to restrict it. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Kisha Amru, when Rabbi Yehuda said that we stay lavan, Shelo Kedarko, you can only trap the rodent if you do it in that unusual way that we spoke about. Lo Amru ela b'stay lavan asmucha le'ir. Aval stay lavan asmucha l'stay ilan, afilu Kedarko. Rabbi Yehuda would agree that in the following scenario, in the following situation, you're allowed to trap the animal and kill the animal Kedarko, even though it's a stay lavan, and that is because it's contiguous to a stay ilon. It's right near an orchard of trees. Here we have a much more dangerous situation financially to face, to encounter, and that is because if these rodents will go from a stay lavan to a continuous stay elon, they will endanger the stay elon. Or the Mishnah says, "Umekarin esapirza b'moed." So we have a fence that surrounds a field, and there's a breakage in the fence. And on Chol Moed, and certainly on Shemitah, we're allowed to close that breach in the wall, in the fence. Inside Mikarin, how do we close this breach on Chol Moed? How do we do this repair? And we have two answers to this question. One is Rabbi Yosef and the other is in a Brisa. Both accept each other. They're not mutually exclusive, two different alternatives. Rabbi Yosef Omar, Behutza v'dafna. What you do is you sort of weave branches around to create a fence. And the literal translation here is Hutza is what we call palm, from a date tree. And Daphna are also some sort of a branch. So what he does is he takes palm branches and he braids them together. And then he adds these Hutza, the Daphna, which are in English called laurel branches, and together, weaving them, he forms a fence. The Masechet Tana, in the Brisa we learned Tsar b'tzar v'eino tach b'tit. He's allowed to pile up stones, one on top of the other, but he's not allowed to attach them with concrete. So there are limits to how far we're going to go in our leniency in allowing you to create this kind of wall around a sada which was breached. And in this case, the limitation is that we're not going to allow you to cement and attach the stones together. And this is called also a kind of a shinui, because in Meleches Chol Moed, as we'll get into it later on, there's a difference between a Maisa Uman and a Maisa Hedjo. A Maisa Uman, which is professional, that would separate each layer of stones with cement in order to adhese them together. But a Maisa Hedjo would be if you just simply pile one stone on top of the other, create a sort of a temporary, almost slap shot to kind of fence around it. That's not a professional. And then we're more lake making. Amar Rav Chizda, the Mishnah tells us that in Chol Moed, you can close the breach. That kind of repair you could do, but you cannot build a wall once it falls down. To rebuild a wall is prohibited. And Rav Chizda wants to give us a little bit of a kula in terms of rebuilding a wall. Lo shano ela kosel hagina, aval kosel achotzer bone kedarko. When we're talking about protecting growth, like for example, you have a garden that's called a gina, and you want to rebuild the wall that fell down, that we're not going to allow you to do. And, there's no great financial loss here involved if there's a breach in the wall and you make a temporary kind of repair in the wall. You don't have to rebuild the wall. However, when it comes to a chotzer, now we're dealing with a whole different set of circumstances. You're talking about a wall that surrounds a courtyard, and there's a house, you live there inside the courtyard. And what's going to happen is that if the wall that surrounds your house is broken, certainly if you leave it breached, you can really attract ganovim, thieves can break into your house. And we're not going to play games and say, all right, we'll only allow you to make repairs, but not to rebuild a wall. Can you imagine what kind of a financial loss you might suffer if the thieves break into your house because there's no wall that protects and prevents them from doing so? So that's where Rav Chizda is telling us that there's a kula that on Chol Moed we may be able to allow you to build a wall. And the Gemara supports Rav Chizda, Lema Mesayele. We have a brisa that says, Kosel hagochel or chusa rabim, soser ubona kedarka. Now, we didn't read the last two words, but let's deliberately ignore the last two words where the brisa gives an explanation that underlies this halacha. We're talking about a courtyard, and there's a wall around the courtyard, and it's leaning over. It's like the leaning tower of Pisa. And it's precarious. It's dangerous. That's the next two words in the brisa, the last two words. So we're talking about something that is leaning over into a public area. So, Sarah, he can break down the wall Ubone kedarko, and build it the normal, usual way, even on Chol Hamoed, building a wall. And that certainly would support Rav Chizda when he speaks about the kosel of a chatzah. Then the Brisa explains it nesakana, because if it collapses, it could fall chas v'sholom on people who are walking over a derech, who are pedestrians in the street, and somebody could chas v'sholom get very, very badly injured. And the Gemara very often speaks about not walking below a leaning coast, because it might fall on your head chas v'sholom. And we'll soon see that the Gemara is going to quote this price, and not as a right to Rav Chisda, but as a cash on Rav. We have another version, Tashma. Let's refute Rav Chisda. We would not allow you to rebuild a wall unless there was the element and that variable of tzakana. Lemet heavy tiyuf to the Rav Chisda. Amalcha Rav Chisda hasam sotzer ubone. Hacha bone v'lo sotzer. My case, says Rav Chisda, where we're allowing you to rebuild a wall around a chotzer, that's bone v'lo sotzer. He's rebuilding a wall, but he's not demolishing a wall. In the case of demolishing a wall, you're involved in a double malach, meleches soser, and then meleches boner. Soser is a malach unto itself, to demolish a wall. If you're doing both, you're demolishing the existing wall in order to replace it by building a replacement wall. That requires the heter of mipnei sakana. That variable must be there. The Gemara now asks the following question. The Brisa allows you to rebuild this wall. Hasam nami listar v'lo lifnei. Why shouldn't we, in the Brisa's case, be a little bit machmir? Let's allow him to demolish the wall, and that would achieve our goal. Why are we allowing him to rebuild the wall? Once he demolishes the wall, which is half a malach, it's only meleches soser without boner, we've accomplished that goal. We eliminated the danger element. That should be sufficient. When it says him came mimna below soser, you're not going to allow him to rebuild the wall. He's not going to be soser the wall. At least soser, the wall as it is, it's not in great shape. It's the leaning tower, but nevertheless, it does provide some minimum amount of protection from Ganovin. Now you're going to tell him, well, it's a danger. We're going to allow you to do one malach, that's soser, but we're not going to allow you to rebuild the wall. He's not interested in that. We can medayek from our Mishnah a support text for Rav Chizda's explanation regarding a wall around a garden and not a wall around a courtyard. The Katani, the Mishnah says, "B'shvius bone kedarko." The Mishnah permits you to build a wall, an entire wall, in in the usual way, in shvius. Where is this wall? If it's the wall that surrounds the courtyard, do I need you to tell me a chiddush that you're allowed to build in a usual, normal way during Shemitah? This is what's called residential construction. The Torah prohibits malacha in the fields on Shvius because of the peiros of Shvius, because of that which is growing in the field. Here he's just doing construction. He's in a chatzah. El avdegina, by process of elimination, we have to assume if there's a chiddush in that Mishnah, we're talking about a gina, which is a garden where the vegetables growing. And now the Mishnah is teaching me that you're allowed to build a wall in a garden on Shvius, even though l'chora he's protecting his Yerakos, which would be awesome. It looks like to the onlooker, the spectator, that he's building this as a wall to protect his produce, his vegetable. That's forbidden on Shvius. So again, when he's building this wall around his garden, it looks like he's doing labor for the benefit of the crop, and that's forbidden on Shvius. Shmamina, the Mishnah is telling us that with regard to the wall of a garden, and not a courtyard, because in the case of a courtyard, that's construction, that has nothing to do with Shvius, that's not also. The garden wall, we're going to allow you to temporarily repair it on Chol Moed, because without that wall, you're lacking protection. But we're not going to allow you to rebuild the wall. In the case of a courtyard, he can rebuild the wall because that's not related at all to his crop. It has no overlap with the Easter of Shvi. Now we start the Mishnah here on Daf Zayin Omid Aleph. The Mishnah addresses the question of Bedikas Tsaras on Chol Moed. And there are many different stages in the process of determining that this person is Tameh B'tumat Tsaras. What's critical to all these stages is that the Kohen, and only the Kohen, could establish the status of Tumah, of Tsaras, at any stage whatsoever. We can't do it without a Kohen. And now the Kohen has to be Roa Es HaNega. He's got to examine the Nega, this, part of the natural skin that's manifesting some sort of a pathological, abnormal skin disease, if you want to call it that. And there's an entire perek, Yud Gimel, in Vayikra dedicated to the Kohen establishing the Tumah of Tsaras. So let's say he has skin that turns white, and there's some appearance that this whiteness is deeper than skin level. It goes below skin level. Now, if it contains white hairs and it contains some sort of natural skin, the combination of various factors leads the Kohen to the first stage, which is going to be called Hezger, confinement. So there's number one, whiteness of the skin. Number two, white hairs, or perhaps inside the whiteness there's natural flesh. Then he makes a declaration. The Kohen declares the man to be a mitzora muchla. That's because it's confirmed. He's got all the factors that are necessary. However, let's say he's got a patch of white skin, but he doesn't have the other symptoms, the white hair and the natural colored skin in the middle of this patch. In such a case, the Kohen declares the suspected mitzora to be a mitzora muzgar. Muzgar means he's confined. And for 7 days he's confined, what we call today bidud. And upon the completion of that process of 7 days of bidud, he goes ahead and he reevaluates the condition of this skin disease. And now if he sees all that, basically all that he saw in the first round a week ago, those things have not really changed. It's status quo. The other additional symptoms to the whiteness have not appeared. Then he isolates the mitzora for another 7 days of Hezger. And once again, if at the end of the second day, 7-day period of confinement, it's status quo, then the Mitzorah is declared to be Tor. If at any point the Kohen begins to see manifestation of the additional symptoms, then, or perhaps Pasa Nega, if he sees that the Nega spreads, then he pronounces him to be a confirmed Mitzorah. Again, there are many different types of Mitzorah. We're not really even touching the tip of the iceberg. What's Rav Meir's sheet? Rav Meir Omer Roen es Hanegoyim Lahakil Avalo Lahach. A Kohen is allowed to inspect that suspicious pathological skin phenomenon, and he may declare, the Kohen may declare that this person is Tor. He just simply does not have tzaras. This is not it. However, although the Kohen is allowed to check out this phenomenon, the skin disease, on Chol Moed and declare the person Tor, that's called Lahakil, Avalo Lahachni. If he's going to determine that indeed this person is Tameh, that's going to cause anything but Simchas Yontif. It's going to undermine Simchas Yontif when the Mitzorah realizes that he's on his way to be Tameh. It's going to give him bring him into a state of distress, and that's antithetical to the mitzvah of V'samachta b'chagecha. And we'll see later on in the Gemara is going to explain that everything depends upon the legal establishment by the Kohen of this individual state of Tumah. When he pronounces him, it's Tameh. So Rabbi Meir holds the Kohen has the right to withhold his verdict if he sees that he should be Tameh, and he has all these symptoms of tzaras, and therefore that's fine. The man remains Tar, because until the Kohen is allowed to use his discretion and decide that he's not going to declare the person as Tameh. The Chachamim prohibit inspection of tzaras, whether it's lahakil or lahachna, because once the Kohen inspects the tzaras and he sees that all the symptoms of tzaras are there, then he's going to have to deliver a decision that this man is tameh. So what do? You're holding out for and lenient because you think that there's a hope that he's going to render him tar. We don't know that he's going to render him tar. Better to refrain from the examination entirely. And again, as long as he doesn't, the Kohen doesn't render or doesn't examine at all, then he remains tar, and that's fine. Anya, we learned in a brisa, Rabbi Meir Omer Romes Hanagoyim Lahakel Avalo Lahachmi. Rabbi Yossi Omer. Rabbi Yossi is going to reflect the shita of the Chachamim in our Mishnah. Lo Lahakel Avalo Lahachmi. She'im atad niskak lo lahakel. If you're going to require an examination on the part of a Kohen, and you're holding out for a lenient decision that the Kohen will determine that he's tar, you know what? No one's guaranteeing that. If he sees that the affliction really has all the symptoms of a mitzorah, of a tameh, he's going to have to issue a verdict that he's tameh. So let's not get involved in it at all. Omar Rebbe now makes a statement. Nirim divrei Rabbi Meir b'muzgar, v'divrei Rabbi Yossi b'muchla. So Rebbe comes up with a kind of a compromise shita in which he accepts both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi. He's going to accept Rabbi Meir if we're talking about a muzgar. And as we said earlier, a muzgar is a confined mitzorah for that 7-day period and the second 7-day period if there's status quo, nothing changes. And we're going to allow the Kohen to examine a mitzorah muzgar on Chol Moed, so that in the hope that he will declare the the mitzvah to be tar. And in the worst case scenario, he'll confirm that this mitzvah remains in that state. Now, we'll explain this further when we get to Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi says, b'muchlat, meaning Rebbe is going to accept Rabbi Yossi b'muchlat, and in a case of mitzvah muchlat, we're not going to allow the Kohen to examine the nega on Chol Moed. Why? Because this mitzvah is a confirmed mitzvah, and now we're holding out for the possibility that the Kohen might determine that he's healed from his saras. And once the Kohen examines a person who is already confirmed as a mitzvah, he's a mitzvah muchlat, then Rabbi Yossi says, as a result of this examination, the Kohen will have to render a decision. That's the absolute requirement. And he might decide that the man is tameh. But in the case of a muzgar, Rebbe holds that what is the decision that's going to be handed down by the Kohen in the case of a muzgar, of a confined mitzvah? He's not going to disturb his simchas yontif. He may, on the contrary, he may bring him to rejoice on yontif. So Rebbe's argument in accepting the kula of Rabbi Meir and allowing for the Kohen to examine the affliction is based on the fact that in a case of a muzgar, there could be good news, and if not, there's only status quo news, meaning there's no bad news here. On the one hand, the Kohen may examine the tzaras and determine that he doesn't have tzaras, and he goes out of confinement. That's great news, simchas yontiv. On the other hand, he may determine that he still remains in the status of hezger. I mean, that you'll see the Gemara of Rav is going to limit that to hezger rishon, but we'll get to that in just a minute. So in the case of a muzgar, okay, in the worst case scenario, the bad news is that he remains muzgar, but things haven't changed for the worse. And therefore, we're going to allow the examination. On the other hand, in the case of a muchlat, he may determine that he is tameh. And if he sees that there are simanim of tumah, he's required to determine that he's tameh, and that's something that we want to avoid. And therefore, in the case of a muchlat, we're going to accept Rabbi Yossi, and we're going to discourage, or shall we say, prohibit the Kohen from inspecting the tzaras. Omar Rava clarifies this machlok. He says, bitar, person is completely tar. He's never been examined. This can only lead to bad news. We're not going to allow the Kohen to examine it because he may determine that he's a mitzvah. There's no good news because right now he's tar. Let him remain tar. On the other hand, if it's the first hezger, at the end of the 7-day period, the first round of 7-day period, then everybody agrees, even Rabbi Yossi, that we can encourage the Kohen to examine the tzaras. And the reason for that is that it's a win-win situation, because if the Kohen is able to pronounce him tar, then he goes out of confinement, he's out of bidud, and that's good news. And if in the worst case scenario, the Kohen finds that he has to remain for another 7 days, he's not any worse off than he was before. Hopefully he's on his way to recovery. Ki pligi, so where then is the machlokes? And that's the Gemara here on Daf Zayin Amud Beis, and that is behezger sheni. So we were at the end of the second confinement, second 7-day period. And if that falls on Chol Moed, then there's no longer a hezger. We don't have a hezger for a third round. So either he's going to be confirmed as a mitzorah, or we're going to determine that he's tar. So there's a 50-50 chance that there'll be good news or bad news. Mar Sovar, according to Rabbi Meir, the Kohen Talia Mills, the Kohen has the right to determine whether or not he wants to be Matami him or not be Matami. And therefore, Rabbi Meir allows the B'dika, the Re'iyah of the Negan Cholamoid, Itar Amaletar. If he finds him to be Tar, the Kohen will pronounce him and declare him as Tar. That's great news. That's a Yontif that could give. The Itame, but if on the other hand he sees that the symptoms are such that he really got worse and it's Tame, is then Shasik, he doesn't have to render any decision. Mum's the word. That's the Shita of Rabbi Meir. Umar Savar, Rabbi Yossi disagrees, and he says that if we read the pasuk carefully, it says Litaro o Litam. The Kohen has to examine the man and determine either that this affliction is tar or it's tameh. And he doesn't have that joker card in his back pocket to say nothing. He's got to make a clear determination. And therefore, don't examine this man on Chol Moed, because he might be forced to proclaim that this musgar is really a mukhla. He's a confirmed mitzorah, and that's going to cause him distress on Chol Moed, and that is prohibited.